Right, so jumping straight in, I'm on Playground and I'm just generating some ideas of some shots for some monks in the mountain. I wanted this shot to have some characters in it, have some monks. Predominant inspiration though was the sort of scenery around the Himalayas. So I'm going into Gaia here and I'm just taking one of their pre-built mountain ranges. What I did here was just change the scale up a little bit, just to make the mountains a bit more imposing. Before I import it into Unreal Engine. So it's important to get the scales right here. And all I'm doing now is just applying a landscape preset material to the geometry that's come in. Ended up not going with this one in the end. It was a very, very last minute change. Here I'm trying to figure out a rough position for a camera, terraforming the landscape, a reference in just for scale. I think it's always important. And I'm also experimenting with nanite tessellation, virtual height fields. Now I'm using ultradynamic sky. I'm moving the initial cloud layer down. Got these set to cinematic clouds. That just allows them to sort of sit nicely within the peaks. And then I've enabled the 2-layer option, which allows me to put a layer of clouds slightly above that. So about this point, I need to try and figure out what I actually want from this shot. So I always find doing a little sketch super useful. I knew that I wanted to add some stairs that go down the mountain, that go away from the camera. I figured there would be some fog and some clouds that were coming through the foreground and the background. And I know that the base geometry wasn't good enough. So I'm just downloading some assets now from the Quixel bridge. I ended up not really using any of these. I did use the tomb and the staircase, which you can see me putting in now. Textures at the moment, obviously they're completely off. You've got this sort of mossy looking surface which is on the stairs, but that's okay. At this stage it's just about finding the rough geometry of these things before we go in afterwards and texture them to make them all look appropriate to the surroundings. I was very careful to get these lined up in the right way. And then just copying and pasting it down the rest of the staircase. And just painting on some of the auto layers for the material pack I was using at the time. And with any foreground work that I do of rock faces, I will always use 3D scans, Quixel Bridge 3D scans, photogrammetry, so that's what you can see me doing here. Clearly with this scan, they've got a base to it. Because we're high up on the cliff face, we don't need that base. So here I am just deforming the geometry, just using the plane cut tool, which comes with Unreal, just to cut these geometries to something which I could stack quite easily. And due to the size of it, I ended up only needing to use this one asset to essentially cover the entire foreground rock face, which was handy. Again, the texturing isn't ideal, so you can see me here actually adding the texturing system which comes with ultradynamic sky. It's a material modifier. Essentially all it does is it makes the rocks or makes materials wet when it's raining, and it makes them white when it's snowing. After applying that, I will end up applying that to the staircase, but after applying that you can see that the textures make much more sense in the context. So I'm switching into detail lighting mode quite often, purely because the way that the virtual height fields work and the tessellation works, it just means that every time you make a change to the landscape, by deforming it, you have to rebuild the data. By going into detail lighting view, it sort of fixes this. I don't really know what I was trying to do here. I think that this, for me in my head, was a more quicker way of building these temples out. Yeah, it just didn't really work. So I decided to move on. I'd come back to that at a later date. What I started to do now was actually working on the outfits that the monks would be wearing on the staircase. I made a mistake here. I was using the Mixamo based skeletal mesh purely because it had the animation baked on it already. Don't use the Mixamo default skeletal rigs, although they are shaped like people. They have joints which are very difficult to work with. There are areas of it which are very disproportionate and quite hard to get clothes onto. And you'll see with these trousers, I had quite a issue getting them onto the character in the end, purely because of the proportions of these characters. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second, but I was trying my hardest to get this to get these trousers up over this model's BBL, but it wasn't it wasn't working. So I ended up scrapping this whole model. As you can see at the bottom, it's got the animation. So the animation is baked onto this model already. It was just such a pain. I spent hours trying to get this clothing attached to the character in the right way, and I just had to reset it in the end. Pretty new to Marvelous Designer. I think this was one of my second or third time using it, and really basic sort of costume here. So I wanted to have this garment really oversized with a peak at the top, sort of symbolizing the mountain range. I figured that the environment which these monks would live in would be pretty cold, so a large piece of fabric which would cover the whole body I figured would be good. How they see through them, at a later date I could go in and really work on these costumes, and I think, you know, looking back, I probably should have spent some more time texturing them at the very minimum. But overall, it was my sort of first time using Marvelous Designer here, so it's all part of the learning curve. And you know, these are the things that you pick up whilst modelling. This whole learning curve using this software was not fun. Got there in the end. I mean, I suppose you have to go through these little mistakes every time to get better for next time, make the next time more efficient. Trouble is, I've always found that next time I always try and do something more advanced and have to learn all over again, so it never seems more efficient. You always move the goalposts with these softwares, but yeah, I'm happy with how it ended up in the end. So yeah, just struggling with this hat and these garments, but now that I've uploaded that new skeletal mesh in, the clipping issues are a little bit less. I did end up figuring out that the friction or the weight of the garment had to be increased to stop those clippings from occurring. I didn't know that at the time, but now I do. So adjusting the wind here, obviously high up in the mountains, going to be some wind. Wanted to add that to the animation, so added a bit of wind. Yeah, then it was time to add fabric. I know that Marvelous Designer have their own. Quite like the Megascan assets though, from Bridge. So I ended up going for one of their sort of knitted patterns here. I ended up changing the colour in the end. I changed the fabric type off from silk, which was giving this sort of shiny finish to the material. I didn't need it in the end, so I went back with the matte. So jumping back into Unreal Engine now, I am on a demo map from these fantastic Korean temple assets. They didn't have them all as static meshes baked together, but what they did have was this demo map where they kindly put them all in folders. So all I did was just select all of the assets within the folders, merge them into a new actor, and save them into the project file. So that's what you can do if there's no blueprints. Blueprints are super useful because it means you don't have to do that, but when you do have to do it, that's merging the actors and just importing them back in is the best way of doing it. Then just applied the same surface wetness modifier from Ultra Dynamic Sky to the assets, to the building assets, and then I wanted to add some sort of foreground geometries, some additional lighting. So I'm just adding these lights in here to add a bit more of a little bit more to the scene. Here you can see I added the Buddhist shrine. And just modifying the rock face to accommodate it. I ended up losing the candles in the end. It just looks a bit strange with all the wind blowing on the character's clothes, and the Naga component wasn't really reacting at all to the wind. So in the end, it just looked a bit odd. You've got a strong wind being implied by the garments, and yet there's no wind implied by the candles, which would go straight out in real life. So it looks a bit odd. So got rid of them in the end. Did end up keeping the ones in the shrine. I figured that those could stay lit purely because they'd be shielded from the wind, but every other candle I ended up turning into a small sort of gas lamp, which I figured would be more appropriate, or at least look more realistic. So just adding some more assets to the scene. I've got these little statues, Buddhist statues. In terms of producing the scene, the only things that were paid assets were the Marvelous Designer. Everything else was done in Engine and with free content. So if you don't need cloth simulations in your scenes, then you don't need Marvelous Designer. I do know that Unreal Engine now have their own cloth simulations. Don't know how to do it. I'm still pretty new to all of it. So you typically just use Unreal Engine just for the scene composition, the lighting, fluid dynamics if they're not too complicated, and then everything else I'll export to different softwares. And at this point, I'm pretty much done from everything that I wanted to do for the scene for now. Okay, so this is the list of things that now need to be done. So I've taken a screenshot off the model, I've printed it out, and I've just done some drawing over the top, some chimney smoke in the background. I think that will add a bit of dynamic to the background shot. And also there's these flags that you see a lot in Nepal and in the Himalayas, which they're like these prayer flags. I want to try and get them in. And then the same with these streaking flags that come down the rock face. I think that could be nice as well. Just some prop stuff, pink flowers, I think would look nice on the snow. Oh, and some birds. Other than that, I think then I will wrap it up. Thanks, Past Ed. So, you heard the man. I need some flags. I need some streakers. I need some birds. I need some clouds. I need some fog. I need lots of different non-static things in the scene. So I'm hopping back over now to Marvelous Designer. I have exported the rock face. Again, I've merged the actors. I've exported it as an FBX, and then I have imported it into Marvelous Designer here to add some streaker material over the top of the rock face. Now, this is not going to be perfect, unfortunately, purely because I don't know if the material that is visible in Unreal Engine is got the displacement to it. I don't know if it's ambient occlusion, but essentially these do clip through the rock face in some areas, even though the model, well, they're being modeled on top of the model. The actual mesh seems degenerated or cold. So to be simplified purely from Marvel's designer. It works out in the end. I think for more detailed stuff though, you'd have to visit it a little bit more carefully. But for this purpose and for what the camera sees, because remember it's always what the camera sees, it was fine. So adding the wind in again, just a little bit of movement with the flags, and this is when I, on reflection, think trouble with all these simulations is they do make your scenes look more realistic, but the minute they start glitching, they can completely remove the immersion. So you're in this weird state of the simulation makes it look realistic, but the glitches make it look more unrealistic. So yeah, it's a bit strange in that sense, but I put them in anyway. Mind you, I did forget where the 0 axis was for this. It turns out to be one of the rock faces in there, but just to double check, I did put in the actor and just lined it up. And make sure you're using folders in your sequencer. Makes your life so much easier down the line, especially when you're using big scenes. Now I'm just using the Easy Fog assets by William Falker. William Falker? I don't know. If you're watching this, thanks a lot. These are great. You guys check out his channel. You've probably seen him already. But yeah, he just makes great UE5 content and this great fog pack as well. So yeah, just populating the scene. I wanted to have these sort of clouds going over the mountain to add a little bit of contrast to the character scaling the steps. I wanted to add a bit of fog behind him. There is a weird opacity tiling thing here with the fog. I noticed that the borders, if you stack a lot of them up, they can sometimes clip, where you get this kind of strange looking border. You can kind of see it now. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a setting I've got on. It might be due to the transparencies of the assets, but yeah, either way, it's an easy problem to fix. You're just going to navigate the fog into an area where it doesn't clip with any other pieces of fog. So now working on the flags, I am adding the smart cable connectors, which is something I picked up on the UE5 marketplace. Usually it's used to just put infrastructure into sort of city scenes, but I thought it could double up here as a sort of flag pole holder. I've obviously embedded it within the temples themselves, so you don't see them as electricity poles, but they do, with a bit of change, do look like they could be something which hold flags. So I get that exported and I put this into Marvelous Designer. So this footage is going to speed up a fair bit here, purely because the first issue I had was that the FBX was importing in the wrong axes, and second of all because this was probably the most trivial part of the entire, menial part of the entire project, where I'm just taking two corners of this square piece of cloth and I'm tacking using the tack tool, tack to actor, and I do that for every single flag, so it takes a long time. So if the footage is going to speed up to about 3,000 times here, I think. If anyone knows any quicker way of doing this, please do let me know in the comments. But yeah, for now, that yeah, I just went off and just tapped each and every one of these. I think the whole process took about 30 minutes, maybe. So yeah, a little bit of a task, but I think it worked out well in the end. I think it was worth it, and they're not without the glitches either. Once you put this wind onto them, you can really see the effect that this has. I think it's a great effect, and when we changed the material to something a little bit heavier, the flags actually started folding over themselves, which was perfect. I mean, if you see the the scenes of sort of prayer flags up in the Himalayas, because of the strong winds, it's very common. You see flags folded over themselves, flags which are ripped. So yeah, it worked out well in the end. I think the only thing with all of these Marvelous Designer assets that I'm using is that the texturing on them could be so much better. There's transparency, or there's at least translucency with these flags in real life because of the materials. The materials on the characters, they could have had decals on them, they could have had just a little bit more work, but I think for a quick sort of couple-day project that this ended up being, that was fine. I mean, you can really go into this, and with this one scene, I mean, you can polish it off and you can make it look so glitchless and so seamless, but it just, yeah, it's a tiny thing. But what I did want to have, so I did want to have these fog, smoke sort of effects coming over the top here, just to sort of show that there was life, there was chimney smoke, something. The place was occupied, that implies that there's more people there. So I added those in, and here I'm working on a bird asset animation, just imported a bit weird, so I'm just fixing up the textures and just seeing sort of a rough position from the camera where this would work. I mean, the animation is just a looped flying animation. So all I did was I slowed that down to match the slowed pace of the video. I've rendered all of my wind sims and cloth simulations out to about third real speed. And that just gives me a bit of flexibility while I'm rendering to speed up the frame rate or drop it and have some slow motion stuff, which I ended up using at the end, capitalised on the sort of slow motion feel. So if you've ever done tracking before, this will be quite familiar, but all I've done is I've set up a camera rig rail. I've marked its position from 0 to 1, 1 being the end, 0 being the start, and I have attached the bird animation onto that as it moves. So after looking the orientation of the bird, it follows the rail exactly. So yeah, just adding a couple of these in now. Just add some more birds in, have them all on their different tracks. And you can attach more than one bird onto each track, but I think for the purposes of this shot, I wanted it to look pretty scarce. So just the 3 birds this time. And I should have really done this part with the fog animations on. It just meant from when I ended up turning them back on, a lot of the birds were hidden. And I've noticed now that because I'm going to speed this project down, the snow pretty much has to go. I couldn't find a way of changing the speed of the snow in the ultra dynamic sky. It probably is there. I just couldn't find it, so I just turned it off completely and just playing around with these birds a little bit more. So next I went over to the smoke components that I put down. This is just a base grid 3D gas emitter which comes from the Niagara fluids. I just changed the density to make it look less like something was on fire, but more like just puffs of smoke were coming out. And yeah, that's pretty much reaching the end now of this project. I think that the only thing left to do was the flowers that I wanted to add in. And I also wanted to change the background mountain a bit, which I ended up doing through texturing as opposed to modeling. Pink flowers, let's get them in. This is another photo scan. I think this one was on Sketchfab, but it looks like it maybe have originally come from something like Polycam originally. Again, just using the mesh cut tool in Unreal to just change these a little bit. I know that you can sim these, do some physics sims of them coming down the stairs. I really didn't want to do that. I knew that this project was pretty much reaching its end and I wanted to get this done before Thursday, and this was Tuesday morning, I think about 1 o'clock. So I knew that I needed to get this done, so I just popped them in. Changing the lights as well. This yellow light was a little bit too harsh. It took too much of the camera's attention. So I'm adding some similar lights around the platform here, just to give that ascending character a little bit more focus. So some final tweaks here, knowing that it's pretty much where I want it to be. Just changing this foreground rock face. Trouble is, when the Megascans asset come too close to the camera, they can look a little bit fake. So the idea here is now just changing these rock faces so that they're still far away and they still look realistic. And yeah, just some final compiling and bug fixing, and I think then that's where I call it a day. Oh, and one final thing on these streaker flags, just because they looked a little bit off, I did add the surface effects from Ultra Dynamic Sky onto them to give them a little bit of snow texturing. And finally the mountain I fixed up. This is where I decide that I want to not use M4 magic anymore, but instead use MW auto material, which ended up looking better. And it's free, so no brainer. So hopping into After Effects right now, this is where we start doing color grading. I use the RG Magic Bullet, which comes with Cinema 4D as a pack. Really useful. It does all your color grading for you. It has some like guided color grading, which I found really useful working on this. And just experimenting with a couple things. I'm using the Cosmo 2, the renoiser, and giving it a little bit of sharpness as well. And just really playing around here. I've run a multi-monitor setup, so I will occasionally put this into other monitors just to see what the color looks like on them. I think as a basis, I didn't want to add any crazy color grading to it. I wanted to add some deeper contrast, make the shadows a little darker. But in terms of that, I just exported it. I think it looked good, just as this neutral scene. And here I'm just chopping up the video in Premiere Pro, just because I knew that I wanted to have an area of it which was faster paced, and then I wanted it to slow down and then speed back up again. I didn't know about the time remapping tool here. And yeah, if you've got any feedback or advice in terms of anything that you've noticed that I've done which you guys would do differently, do let me know. I'm still learning it also. But I hope this video has helped sort of see how a process like this can happen from the very start all the way to the end. I think for you guys, if it can help you with a couple of ideas or things you hadn't thought about before, then that's great. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, then do subscribe and like the video. And if you don't like what you see, then hope you like the next one. All right, take care.